Don't take your mouse for granted. It's not inevitable.
I hope you'll go along with this rather unusual setting and the fact that I remain seated when I get introduced, and the fact that I'm going to come to you mostly through this medium here for the rest of the show. And I should tell you that I'm backed up by quite a staff of people between here and Menlo Park, where Stanford Research is located, some 30 miles south of here. And if every one of us does our job well, it'll all go very interesting, I think. The research program that I'm going to describe to you is quickly characterizable by saying, if in your office, you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display backed up by a computer that was alive for you all day and was instantly responsive instantly responsive to every action you had, how much value could you derive from that? Well, this basically...
What you're looking at now is literally called the mother of all demos.
Research Center at Stanford Research Institute.
And when it comes to demos, I'm sure you've seen this one.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years.
And this one. And maybe even this one.
So we looked at this and studied all these, and that's where we want to be. That is where we want to be. And we are introducing a product today that takes us exactly there. And that product is called iPod.
But this video, in 1968, is the mother of all demos.
Now the whole session is going to be devoted to trying to describe and present to you the nature of this program. But unfortunately, fortunately, the products of this program, the technology of it, lends itself well to an interesting way to portray it for you. So we're going to try our best to show you rather than tell you about this program. So I have a statement with some entities' words, and I can do some operations on these.
From everything I know, this shot of Douglas Engelbart proudly controlling the NLS during the mother of all demos is the first time the mouse was ever seen by the public.
Text. Say after there, I'd like to copy from that.
During the demonstration, there were people who were enthralled by his ability to click on links.
And the link is something that'll go between files.
Video conference with remote colleagues.
Now, computer, do the automatic switching that'll bring in a camera picture from the camera mounted on his console, such as the camera mounted on mine is. Hi, Bill.
And work on collaborative documents.
Audio, you can see my work, you can point at it, and I can see your face, and we can talk. So let's do some collaborating.
It was kind of like Engelbart was living 50 years in the future. And when it comes to the future, there's this phrase in Silicon Valley.
Actually, I spend a lot of my time, a lot of my media time trying to disown my prescience.
Why is that?
Because it's just not, you know, it would be less than honest. You know, as I've said many times, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed.
And at that moment, the future was right there. And it was so concentrated that it almost existed only in one place, which was Engelbart's lab. But after that demo, things started to change.
The name of the file, and the date, and the time, and who established it. And thereafter, I can always do something. I can ask for the status of a file, and it'll tell me that.
But just a couple of years after the mother of all demos, Engelbart's lab was starting to fade into history as funding fell away. But about the same time, Xerox, yes, the copier company, was putting together a lab of its own called the Palo Alto Research Center. And its mission was to create the Office of the Future. And it just so happened that Engelbart's lab and the work that it had done was a great starting point for that mission. There were only a few people who made the transition from Engelbart's lab to Xerox PARC, but the inventor of the mouse was one.
And then we had the original big display at the time, and that's actually where we ran the first mouse experiments, which we did in '64, where we set up, looked at where I ran the experiments on different pointing devices to compare the effectiveness of them.
And you had built a two-wheeled mouse by that time?
Oh, yes. Yes. Built a two-wheeled mouse and other devices, used joysticks and knee control and a few assorted things like that.
Wasn't there a nose pointer at one point?
There was a nose pointer at one point. It wasn't part of the experiments, but that was a little awkward.
Tell me about who thought up the nose pointer?
Oh, Doug did.
It just seemed that it was the.
Well, it's the idea of, I'll say it, it's the idea of being able to focus on what you're looking at. And we didn't have really good eye trackers at the time, and there were some around much too expensive. And the idea that by looking at something, you could get your focus there, your cursor there.
Bill English kept refining the mouse when he made his move to PARC, and soon enough, PARC had its Office of the Future, of the ultimate human-computer information machine, and they called it the Alto.
Central to the development of the personal computer was the pioneering work being done at Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, which Steve first visited in 1979.
I had 3 or 4 people who kept bugging me that I ought to get my rear over to Xerox PARC and see what they were doing. And so I finally did. I went over there. And they were very kind, and they showed me what they were working on. And they showed me really 3 things. But I was so blinded by the first one that I didn't even really see the other 2. One of the things they showed me was object-oriented programming. They showed me that, but I didn't even see that. The other one they showed me was really a networked computer system. They had over 100 Alto computers, all networked, using email, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't even see that.
Now, it's hard to say that there is one computer that made Apple, but if I had to start somewhere, it would be the Apple II. It was a remarkable piece of engineering that developers loved in the very beginning because of its power. It let programmers make their prompts just like no other machine possibly could. And it enabled those developers to discover a killer app for it. And that killer app was the spreadsheet. You see, in an age of command lines and prompts, the killer app was something that was unusually visual and intuitive because of that. And its functionality is something that we obviously still see in use to this day. In fact, that app alone became the killer app that sold computers for the first time to small businesses. Before, computers were these things that filled an entire room. And after, it was something that was used for balancing budgets or plugging away at making sure that the books were in order. That machine alone took the personal computer and computers in general from a market of hundreds to hundreds of thousands. And that was great news for Apple until IBM took notice.
Well, all of us knew that eventually the shakeout must occur in the personal computer industry, but none of us were prepared for it coming so soon. And as a result of the shakeout, which began the summer of '83, other competitors' failures drove a very nervous market to the safe harbor of the computer industry's giant IBM and the IBM lookalike products. Meanwhile, Lisa, which had captured the world's imagination as an elegant technological achievement, was still a standalone product without the important other products needed that would make it a complete system.
IBM had made an Apple II competitor, the IBM PC, and it was eating Apple's lunch.
But we've taken some important strategic actions, and I can tell you that they are working. The highest priority at Apple Computer over the last 9 months has been to develop a product line strategy, which now is focused around 2 important mainstream families of personal computers. The Apple II, and of course that includes the Apple III, which leverages off of our strong franchise in kindergarten through 12th grade education, the serious home use, and small business. And our new Apple 32-bit Supermicros, which are targeted at the 25 million knowledge workers in business and the important college education market.
Apple decided that if the Apple II took computers from big businesses to small businesses, then their next computer, the Lisa, was going to take computers from small businesses to a more kind of, from like this like more work role to a more creative one. And they were going to do it by adapting the user interface to the way that those knowledge workers and those creatives were already prone to working.
What's so special about Lisa? Oh, I've had other computers. But my Lisa's different. You see, it works the way I do. I can create and combine words, numbers, charts, and pictures virtually in seconds. Look, why don't I just show you how I did this? You see, Lisa's screen is special. Now, you can think of it as being like your office with a desktop and other office fixtures. Now, you see what I mean about the screen? It's very graphical. Here's a place to store information, a folder, and a place to get rid of information, a waste paper basket. On the top of the screen, there's a menu bar. It tells you what kinds of functions are available at any one time. This entire arrangement is called the desktop manager. We control Lisa by pointing to these images on the screen with this unique item called a mouse.
The reason that Jobs was at PARC in the first place was because he knew he needed an interface breakthrough to bring the computer from hundreds of thousands to millions of potential customers.
I was so blinded by the first thing they showed me, which was the graphical user interface. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever seen in my life.
This is such an important moment in computing history that many have called it computing's Prometheus myth. Jobs had taken the GUI from the PARC gods and given it to the people. And in fact, this is what the Lisa's user interface looked like before the PARC trip. And this is what it looked like after. Now here is the interface that Jobs saw at PARC. Coincidence? And so there you have it, a good bit of trivia. Did you know that Jobs and Apple copied the user interface from Xerox, the copier company? In fact, he was so enamored by the user interface that he missed these other important innovations, object-oriented programming and network computing, that would only come around many years later, and some of which were decades later, actually, in service of this interface that was so important. But it's only partly true. Yes, Jobs was dazzled by the GUI, and yes, Lisa's interface looked like a weird skeuomorphic copy of the Altos after they visited PARC. But I'm sure you noticed something, which is that this is not the interface that you're used to seeing. It doesn't look anything like the interface that Apple actually shipped with the Lisa.
Remember, it was very flawed. What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this. So it was obvious. I mean, you could argue about how many years it would take, you could argue about who the winners and losers might be, but you couldn't argue about the inevitability. It was so obvious. You would have felt the same way had you been there.
You see, PARC's work was inspiring to Apple, but it was ultimately still too complex for the knowledge workers and the office workers that Apple was trying to sell to. And so, yes, Apple did copy the copier company. But then they got to work. So, in short, after the PARC visit, Lisa's user interface looked a lot like the Altos. But over time, it evolved from browser trees to files and folders, and yes, a waste paper basket. But you know what stayed exactly the same?
I use 3, and they're not all standard. We have a pointing device called a mouse.
By moving the mouse, we move the pointer.
And the way the tracking spot moves in conjunction with movements of that mouse. I don't know why we call it a mouse. Sometimes I apologize. It started that way, and we never did change it.
To open my folder, I point to it and click the mouse button, selecting it.
For decades, these mice have mediated our relationship with computers. Your hands have evolved as tools of manipulation. They act with intention, grabbing, moving, and shaping objects in our environment. And we're used to looking at things, grabbing them, and moving them around and playing with them to learn more about what they are and what they can do. And that's why the mouse works so well. It's intuitive to think of your hand as the thing that touches and grabs and points. Instead of limiting the human-computer relationship to a stodgy bandwidth of a keyboard, a mouse opens that bandwidth up, really, to a new, almost subconscious level of intentionality. But Engelbart's mouse was not the end-all for human-computer interaction. It just brought humans and computers a little closer together. And that relationship has been one that has been defined by control. A mouse was obedient and moved pixel by pixel. It obeyed your command.
The principles for its operation are quite easy to see. If you'll turn it over, Don. Can you hear me, Don? Would you turn it over and we'll see, right. Its principle is that there are two wheels that roll on the surface. But since they're at right angles and kind of sharp edges, one will roll and the other slide in one direction. Each of these wheels controls through a potentiometer with a voltage output sampled by an 880 converter the numbers taken in by the computer at sample times as to what the horizontal vertical components are to be of where it should put the tracking spot. And as the mouse moves over a surface, then each of those wheels either slides sideways without rolling or rolls an amount that very closely duplicates the particular component of horizontal or vertical in the net motion it makes.
But Engelbart's dream was not about the mechanics of this interaction between the obedient computer and you. That was just the state of technology at its origins. Engelbart's dream was of tools that would augment human intellect. He wanted tools that took human intention and amplified it with machine capability.
Well, this basically characterizes what we've been pursuing for many years in what we call the Augmented Human Intellect Research Center at Stanford Research Institute.
The mouse was a great first step toward that ideal. The desire to communicate not just by telling something what to do, but by pointing is innate for us. And the more a system works to understand human intent, to interpret and act on the subtle human cues that we have, the closer Engelbart gets to his ideal. After all, who cares about the power of a machine if our connection with it pales in comparison?
People always ask me what keeps you up at night. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, the evolution of a pandemic-like respiratory infection.
All right, welcome everybody to our Facebook Live on coronavirus. We knew it was going to come into the United States at probably some point. It just happened to be Washington State, the first place to see it.
A man from Washington State recently returned from China infected with a new virus that is responsible for about 300 cases and at least 6 deaths. It's the first case of the disease reported in the U.S. Public health officials say the risk to the general public remains low. And NPR science correspondent Richard Harris joins us now with more. Hey, Richard.
Hey. A comparison, because we always talk about SARS and we always talk about MERS and things like that. If we could have just go through the slide. I just want to go to the next slide. This is an article that I wrote a little while ago, and I called it Coronavirus Infections More Than the Common Cold. The reason is, up until recently, coronaviruses were like mild things. They were just common cold. Just next slide.
It's going to sound ridiculous, but one of the reasons I remember March 2020 is for this.
Now, it's when typing that you most appreciate the precision and ergonomics of a trackpad. Now, in bringing mouse and trackpad support to iPadOS, we deeply considered the best way to bring a cursor to a touch-first environment. Let me show you how it works. You notice that the shape of the cursor is one most natural for a touch experience. It's round, just like your fingertip.
I was teaching math in the Bronx at the time, and COVID had hit, and my daily driver was a hobbled 5-year-old MacBook Pro that I had that was falling apart after kind of being beaten down all throughout college. By the time my attention was split between iPad's cursor support and Air Force One's luscious, gravity-defying mane, cresting silver waves crashing into the beaches of Mavericks, I was in dire need of a new computer. And my next computer was going to be an iPad. If you've never used the iPad's cursor support, the best way to describe it is that it feels a little like it's reading your mind.
With a traditional pointer, to move it all the way over to the settings icon, I need to perform 2 separate swipes on the trackpad. I wish I could get there in just one swipe. But if we made the acceleration curve stronger or increased the speed of the pointer, it could make it hard to control. On iPadOS, we solve this by adding inertia. Inertia makes it easy to move long distances with a small amount of physical input, similar to how you can flick to scroll a long distance on the touchscreen. Now, with just one flick on the trackpad, I can reach the button.
One of the things I love about Apple is their willingness to rethink the smallest details of their products. And the iPad's cursor is the poster child for that habit. When I first got my iPad, I was just wowed by how good the mouse felt, even better than my Macs, and how it just fit right in with iPadOS, almost like it was designed with a cursor from the very beginning.
When we were building the pointer, we liked being able to flick to target controls, but we found that based on the speed of your swipe, sometimes the pointer would overshoot or undershoot the control. Wouldn't it be great if the pointer could just figure out which control you were aiming for and move there automatically? Well, the new pointer has something called Magnetism that does just that.
If Engelbart's mouse was great because it gave the computer an affordance for understanding human intention by way of pointing, iPad's mouse takes that vision to the next level. Its cursor works even harder to understand what you want when you use it. It morphs into the buttons that you want to control. It magnetically snaps to the thing that you're trying to click. It no longer just is an obedient soldier waiting for a pixel-perfect swipe. It adapts your intent into action.
Magnetism scans the interface to find the control you most likely want to target. Let's go back in time to see how it works. At this point, I'm mid-swipe, and my finger is still touching the trackpad. The moment I lift my finger from the trackpad, the pointing system immediately calculates where the pointer would have landed if it continued moving with inertia. We know that there isn't a target there, so we start scanning around that position in circles up to a fixed radius. We'll find the nearest target in the direction of your swipe and automatically move the pointer there. Since the settings icon is the closest snappable element to the projected position that is also in the direction of the pointer, we move the pointer there automatically the moment you lift your finger from the trackpad. We put a lot of work into tuning this to feel just right. Ideally, people aren't even aware that this is happening. The pointer just magically reads their mind and does the right thing.
On the NLS or the Mac or the Alto, the cursor moves exactly as you direct it. No more, no less. But on the iPad, the system interprets the trajectory and destination of your throw, blending manual input with a layer of intelligence. That interaction, the system adapting your intention, is Engelbart's dream evolving into something tangible. That silly little dot controlled by a silly little trackpad is a humble workhorse that illustrates how computers have gone from machines we merely command to collaborators that interpret our intent and assist us by augmenting our intellect.
And so anyways, I could have a physically gigantic 4K resolution screen right in front of me. And then I can put the VisionOS Slack on one side of it. This is what my blog post was about, right before it came out. I can put messages on the other side. I can put Safari above or, or to the further to the side. I can put a freaking video. I can watch, Wakanda Forever. I keep picking on that because that's when I watch it. I can watch Wakanda Forever off in the corner. Whatever, man. I've got infinite canvas, baby. I can put whatever, wherever. And It is great.
The first time I used a mouse with Apple Vision Pro, I was really excited to see iPad's cursor innovations come forward to Apple's ultimate personal computer. All of the same principles of iPadOS underlay VisionOS, an interface designed for lower resolution input, controlled by a high precision input, with a cursor built to adapt to the interface and ultimately to accelerate actions in line with a user's intent. But not long after I started using it, I noticed that something was different.
Holy flipping crap. How does universal control work as well as it does? It is not perfect, but it is astonishing how good a job it does.
Universal control is a technology that Apple debuted in 2022 that bridges a technological and, as you now know, a historical gap between Mac's cursor and iPad's. It lets you control your iPad with your Mac's input devices. And when Apple released the Vision Pro, it also had the ability to control VisionOS using a traditional mouse. But even more fun than that, it had the ability to leverage universal control to use your Mac's input devices inside of the headset. You could fluidly use one set of input devices for both your Mac and your Vision Pro.
Because what you're doing, universal control, means you can use your Mac's keyboard and your Mac's mouse to control things even within VisionOS, just like you can with an iPad, right? Doing that with the keyboard is not that remarkable. Like, whatever. Yeah, that stands to reason. If you're looking at a text field and you start typing, okay, put the letters in there. Fine. However, the pointer is so good. And the thing that's good about it, like, of course, it's just a mouse pointer. Like, it looks like an iPad pointer within one window. You look at another window, there's the pointer. Sometimes, usually, you can go between windows. I don't know, it's in 3D space. I don't know how, I guess I am looking, and maybe that's what it's doing, and I'm attributing to magic what's really just my own gaze, but it feels like freaking magic.
When you look at a window in VisionOS, a little iPad-inspired mouse cursor moves right to that window, ready for you to use, and that's awesome. But as I used it more, I noticed something even more profound, which was that the cursor didn't just move to the window I was looking at. It teleported to the exact location I was looking at. And so I fiddled with it a little bit, kind of reminded of those early and glorious days of the iPad cursor, and lo and behold, if I focused on a button, my cursor would apparate directly on top of that button, and shortly after morph into that button's shape. The intelligence of the iPad's cursor support, morphing, magnetism, and more, were evolving even further with VisionOS and eye tracking. And it really did feel like magic. And it turns out that's because it was. I was in the middle of researching the limitations of eye tracking when I found it. And the deeper I read, the more I realized that this must be the same system I had experienced on Apple Vision Pro.
Welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Shumin Zai, who has inspired me to be a text input researcher through his work. Shumin Zai is a principal scientist at Google, where he leads and directs research, design, and development of manual and text input systems.
As it turns out, Zai and company had worked on a solution to large screen cursor use all the way back in 1999. Carrying on that tradition from Bill English and Doug Engelbart, their approach to reducing manual work for users, the approach that Apple has implemented with Vision Pro, wasn't to make the mouse faster. It was to help a computer read a user's body language. In fact, most of Zai's life work falls into that category of adapting computers to humans instead of humans to adapt to computers. I mean, hell, he's best known for his role in inventing touchscreen swipe typing, a completely innovative affordance for typing one-handed, which is how most of us use our smartphones most of the time. But I love that paper on magic pointing because it is so pure in its approach. Make the computer more aware of the human, dummy, not the other way around.
What did you succeed in doing with the Mac?
Well, the Macintosh, as you remember when it came out, we called it the computer for the rest of us. And what that meant was that while experts could use some of the computers that were already out, most people didn't want, the computer was not an end in itself, it was a means to an end. And so most people didn't want to learn how to use the computer, they just wanted to use it. And the Macintosh was supposed to be the computer for people that just wanted to use a computer without having to learn how to use one. Spent 6 months. Now, it turned out that the paradox was that to make a computer easier to use, you needed a more powerful computer in the first place because you were going to burn a lot of the cycles on making it easy to use. And so this computer that was easy to use was actually more powerful and could do more things than the less easy to use computer. And it took people a few years to figure that out about the Macintosh, but I think people did.
If you think that Apple's ability to take ideas from the lab and turn them into reality died with the Mac, or maybe with Steve, you'd be wrong. There are always new and innovative human interface approaches out there kicking around in the labs. And one of Apple's great strengths is in taking those ideas or inventing their own and taking them over the finish line, turning them into a product. In many ways, that polish is the point of Apple as a company. New interface ideas are awesome, they're great. A working prototype is even better. And in 1968, or even 1999, that might have been enough. But in half a century, computers have become universal. They are the medium, maybe the ultimate one. And part of what made that possible was the mouse. But because of the mouse, and because of that universality, how we interact with computers is more important to understand and improve than ever before. Yeah, our computers can become even more powerful augmentations to our intellect when they become more aware of the human. But without a scrupulous and critical eye, our symbiotic relationship with machines risks control happening in the wrong direction. And because of that, I think it's worth it for all of us as humans to become a little more aware of our computers, not only the other way around.
A few questions.
Is this out of the picture if I put it here? Great.
Yeah. What we're hoping to do in this whole series is look at this technology. Why is a computer so interesting? So I'm going to start that way.
Okay.
So what's different about this machine?
Excuse me, I have one quick
request. Yep.
I posted a video a couple of weeks ago that became this channel's most viewed video to date.
All right, you're on.
It was about Apple Vision Pro's ultra-wide display. I had woken up late to the news and was kind of immediately wowed by how much I loved it right away.
What is it about this machine? Why is this machine so interesting? Why has it been so influential?
Since then, I've continued to use it even more. In fact, I continue to use the ultra-wide display almost every day since that video went up, which has resulted in more Apple Vision Pro use than pretty much any other time in my time with that device. Basically the last 10 months.
I remember reading a magazine article a long time ago.
But with that increased usage has come increased scrutiny as well. In short, what I want on my device is magic pointing on my Mac when I'm in there, especially when I'm using an enormous ultra-wide display.
The Condor was the most efficient at getting from point A to point B.
You'd be sort of surprised how much friction you feel dragging a cursor from one side of the display to the other, while the computer mindlessly ignores you after getting used to a computer sort of diligently paying attention to exactly where you're paying attention.
Let me do this over again, because I'm just sure I can say this better.
I want my computer to be a partner in execution, if not thought.
I remember reading an article when I was about 12 years old, I think it might have been in Scientific American, where they measured the efficiency of locomotion for all these species on planet Earth. How many kilocalories did they expend to get from point A to point B? And the condor won, came in at the top of the list, surpassed everything else. And humans came in about a third of the way down the list, which was not such a great showing for the crown of creation. And but somebody there had the imagination to test the efficiency of a human riding a bicycle. Human riding a bicycle blew away the condor, all the way off the top of the list. And it made a really big impression on me that we humans are tool builders, and that we can fashion tools that amplify these inherent abilities that we have to spectacular magnitudes. And so for me, a computer has always been a bicycle of the mind. Something that takes us far beyond our inherent abilities.
Don't get me wrong, though. I do love my portable, ultra-wide, dual 4K setup that I can also, use enough to learn that there are still rough edges to this thing. And that headset divide between my Mac and using native apps feels as emblematic of the state of Vision Pro, a forward-looking, futuristic, nascent, and immature approach to computing, as it does of the Mac itself, a historical, almost defiantly stubborn platform that represent the early days of trying to implement Engelbart's vision. To me, the brilliance of the mouse lies in how it encapsulates our humanity. How the most powerful machines we've ever built are not just about efficiency, but about amplifying our focus, our intention, our creativity. And the journey of the computer cursor, from Engelbart's pioneering mouse, or actually days even before that, the iPad's almost magnetic, intelligent pointer, to the Vision Pro's almost telepathic interface, tells a profound story about technology's fundamental purpose itself. It's not about creating more powerful machines, but creating a more intuitive bridge between human intention and computational capability. Each iteration of the cursor represents a deeper understanding of human communication. The original mouse was revolutionary because it translated our innate desire to point and manipulate into digital language. The iPad's cursor added a layer of anticipatory intelligence, sensing not only where we point, but also what we intend to some extent. And the Vision Pro's cursor takes that to an almost mystical level, seeming to almost read our gaze and thought before we form them. What began as a mechanical translation of movement into pixels has evolved into a much more nuanced dialogue between man and machine. Computers are no longer just tools we command, but collaborative partners that seek to understand us. They're learning to interpret not just our explicit instructions, but the subtle, unspoken intentions behind our actions, which to some is exciting and to others is scary. But because of that, the mouse brings us back to Engelbart's original vision for technology itself. It's not about replacing human capability, but amplifying it. And at the same time, it's not about creating obedient machines, but about developing tools that can genuinely extend human intellect. With each evolutionary leap, from mouse to magnetism to gaze tracking, we move closer to that dream of technology that just isn't something that just responds, but something that truly understands. In the end, Engelbart's dream wasn't just about better tools after all. It was better thinking And nowadays, as we confront the logical conclusions of that dream, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, it's worth learning from how we got here in the first place, with the mouse by our side.
And I think we're just at the early stages of this tool, very early stages. And we've come only a very short distance, and it's still in its formation, but already we've seen enormous changes. I think that's nothing compared to what's coming in the next 100 years.
Whew, my legs are tired. I really hope I recorded that.